My name is Elena Marine. I'm 64, and last Tuesday at 3:07 p.m., my own daughter sent me the wrong voice message, the kind of mistake that doesn't just bruise a heart, it drops it from a rooftop. If you've ever discovered a betrayal in one blunt, breathless moment, you'll understand what happened to me in my little kitchen in Savannah, the kettle ticking like a metronome beside the sink while the azaleas outside burned pink in the heat. Before I tell you everything, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and if you want more stories like this, tap like and subscribe. Now, listen closely, because the next words changed my life. Damien, I can't take having my mother here anymore. Lila's voice began my Lila, my only child, the reason I've worked double shifts in other people's houses since I was 19. She's in everything. I've already found a place on the outskirts. It's cheap, $800 a month. Brianna says the title transfer is simple. We can move the house before she realizes. The first sound I made wasn't a cry. It was a small intake of air, a pinched gasp that tasted like tin. I set my mug down so carefully you would have thought it was crystal, as if not spilling tea could keep the rest of my life from spilling everywhere. The voice memo kept going, crisp and cruel through my old phone's speaker. It's still in her name, but my cousin can file it quietly. Lila went on, a low, conspiratorial whisper I'd never heard addressed to me, only about me. If anything happens, we're beneficiaries. Damien laughed in the background. An easy, careless laugh. I'd once read his charm when he held my daughter's hand and called me Ma. Finally, he said, we'll breathe. I replayed the message, then again. Each time, the words sharpened until the edges bit. My house, my name, my mind. They had a plan for all three. People always imagine betrayal as a thunderclap, but it was the tiny details that cut me. The way Lila's tone softened when she said, beneficiaries. The way she added, God forgive me, without meaning forgiveness at all. The squeak of Damien's bar stool as he leaned into the conversation, as if it were any other errand, pick up dry cleaning, sign mother away. My house isn't grand, but it's mine. A pale blue craftsman with a porch that sweats in the summer and sighs in the winter. I scrubbed other people's banisters and polished other people's silver to pay for that porch, to pay for Lila's uniforms and field trips, and a 4-year degree at Coastal State University, when her father vanished into a fog of promises that never rained. Every plank in this floor has a history. The scuff where she learned to tap dance during a thunderstorm. The notch where I dropped my mother's old sewing shears. The corner where Lila fell asleep, with her cheek on a geometry book and her shoes still on. I have ironed the past into these rooms so many times that the air remembers. And now my daughter, my bright, stubborn, beloved girl, was arranging to fold my life in half and file it away. The message ended with the banal clink of a glass. I stood in the silence that followed and realized how loud the house had always been. The hum of the refrigerator, the little pigeons tapping across the porch rail, the neighbors' wind chimes dinging their tired scale. It all sounded like a breath I hadn't noticed I was holding. Sometimes grief feels like drowning. Sometimes it's a door unlocking. I stared at the vase of camellias on my table, a bloom just starting to brown at the edges, and I understood something simple and terrible. Love does not mean I must hand myself over. Love never meant that. The kettle clicked off behind me, and I didn't move. A second passed, then 10. Then I found my hands again. I went to my bedroom and opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside were the things I keep for courage. My mother Teresa's rosary, a photograph of Lila in a paper crown from the year we couldn't afford a real one, and the crimson suit I wore the day my daughter crossed the stage to receive her diploma. I've saved that suit for moments of ceremony and for moments when I needed to remind myself what steel looks like in fabric form. I laid the jacket on the bed and stroked the lapel until the tremor left my fingers. If they see me as weak, then I must arrive as undeniable. I showered, pinned my hair, painted a steady mouth in the mirror. I chose my mother's pearl drops, small moons at my ears. When I buttoned the jacket, the click sounded like a decision locking in. I'd always thought of myself as good at mending hems, hearts, holidays gone wrong. But there are tears you don't stitch. There are tears you learn from. As I pulled a leather folio from the chest deed, policies, bank statements, all the papers I kept reluctantly updated because a woman who cleans houses for a living learns to keep receipts, I felt the familiar hum of fear. Then, beneath it, something quieter and stronger. A line straightening. There are facts. There is proof. There is the long, dull muscle I've built over years of carrying other people's burdens. I could carry my own defense. From the hallway, I heard feet overhead. Lila and Damien were awake. Their voices drifted down, bright and domestic. Coffee? Did you email Bri? Don't forget the realtor's number. They had been living in my guest room just while the paint dries at our place. An arrangement that unrolled like sticky tape 1 week, then 3, then remarks about my confusion delivered with worried smiles. Mom, where did you put the cable bill? You're always misplacing things. Elena, it's dangerous for you to drive at night. Sweetie, we can help with the bank, give us access so it's easier. All of it wrapped in kindness like meat in paper. I slid a note onto the kitchen table. Left early to handle some personal business. Back this afternoon. Business. Not begging, not explaining, not asking permission in my own house. On the way to the door, I paused at the hallway mirror. For a heartbeat, a softer version of me hovered there, the Elena who waited for Sunday calls that never came, who set the table for 3 and then ate standing at the counter because sitting across from 2 silent phones was too loud. I put my palm against the glass as if I could steady her through it. My love, I told the reflection as if it were my mother and the girl I used to be and the woman I am now all at once. We're done being small. I tucked my phone into my bag. I saved the voice memo twice, once to the cloud and once to a little flash drive that lives on my keychain. I recorded myself stating the date and time in a calm voice, then emailed the file to an account Lila doesn't know exists. Paper trails, audio trails, breadcrumbs even a blind wolf could follow. When I stepped onto the porch, the Savannah air lay heavy on my cheeks, syrupy sweet with wisteria. Across the street, Mr. Lionel Pike was already watering his marigolds, in his slippers and a street. Patrick's Day t-shirt in April. He lifted his free hand in a salute. I waved back. In that tiny exchange, my neighborhood aligned itself around me, the ordinary world that had always held me up when my private world wobbled. I walked past the azalea hedge I planted, the year Lila started middle school, bright fuchsia clouds humming with bees. I remembered her with a backpack nearly the size of her torso, how she turned under the live oaks and shouted, "Don't wait up, Mom, I'm brave." She was. I taught her that. Somewhere along the way, she discovered a cheaper version of brave, brave enough to take, not brave enough to stand. I felt the ache of that realization, and then I let the ache be an ache, not a leash. On the sidewalk, I considered turning back to confront them. My jaw tightened with a speech I could deliver. You will not my mother's voice ready on my tongue. But fury is a spark. What I needed was firewood, documents, signatures, an officer to nod and say, "Ma'am, I am not a woman who shouts. I am a woman who files." By the time I reached the gate, my day had arranged itself. Seafront Community Bank first, then Chatham County Clerk's office. Then if the world still tilted, the law firm, my friend Pastor Ruth once mentioned when her church had trouble with a crooked contractor. I did not know yet that the manager at the bank would recognize a forgery with a single glance, that a recorder tucked in my purse would make a grown woman sob out a confession, that a physician I'd never met would hand me a piece of paper that said, in so many words, "You are not crazy." I only knew that I had to take the first step while my courage was hot. "Where are you going so early, Elena?" Mr. Pike called over the hiss of his hose. "To water some fires," I said, smiling a little because the words surprised me with their truth. I walked toward Bull Street beneath the cathedral hush of the live oaks, my heels tapping out a new rhythm on the cracked concrete. The morning smelled like magnolia and possibility. I pressed the strap of my bag against my ribs and felt the square weight of the deed, the small weight of the flash drive, the gold oval of my mother's locket warm against my skin. If Lila had asked me for help, I would have given it. That's the part that stings most. But she chose a shortcut paved with my bones. So I would lay down a longer road, one lined with notarized stamps and names and numbers and the stubborn mercy of truth. By the time I reached the bus stop, the sun had cleared the rooftops. I checked the voice memo one more time, not because I doubted what I'd heard, but because certainty is a bridge you cross and recross when your heart is involved. Lila's words played again, terrible and tidy. I stopped the audio before it ended. I didn't need to hear the laugh. "Comment where you're listening from." I whispered to the day, to the stranger I would have been if not for this, to anyone who might need the courage I was borrowing now. If this story helps you stand up, share it with someone who needs it. And if you want more truth, more fire, hit like and subscribe. The bus sighed to a halt. I climbed aboard, crimson suit bright as a signal flare, and paid my fare with a steady hand. The city slid by squares and statues and those stubborn, beautiful trees, and I felt it, finally, the sudden, bracing relief of choosing myself. The bus rumbled along Abercorn Street, its windows fogged with the breath of early commuters, and I sat stiff-backed in my crimson suit. A young woman with earbuds glanced at me, then away, as if she sensed the unusual electricity radiating from an older woman who had already lived too many lives in silence. I clasped my folio tighter against my chest. At 8 sharp, I stepped into Seafront Community Bank. The place smelled faintly of lemon polish and printer ink. I had been banking there for more than 20 years, since the days I cashed checks from mopping floors and polishing brass in Savannah's historic mansions. Behind the counter stood Nora Whitaker, the branch manager. She had kind hazel eyes and a streak of gray in her hair, and she always greeted me as Miss Elena, with the sort of respect that reminded me of my mother's era. "Good morning, Miss Elena," Nora said warmly. Then her smile faltered when she took in my tailored suit and the steady flame in my eyes. "What brings you here so early?" "I need to review all transactions on my account for the past 6 months," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "And I want to change my beneficiaries immediately. Also, Nora," I leaned closer, "tell me if anyone else has been snooping into my accounts." Her brows lifted, but she clicked across her computer obediently. A moment later, she frowned. "That's strange. Your daughter, Miss Lila, has inquired several times. She presented an authorization letter signed by you, giving her access to your statements." My stomach hardened like a clenched fist. "Show me that letter." Nora retrieved a scanned copy. My name sprawled across the bottom, but the slant was wrong, the E curling upward in a way my hand had never moved. It was a child's tracing of an adult's signature. "This is a forgery," I said coldly, pulling out my driver's license for comparison. "She never had permission. Cancel all authorizations, lock my account, and place a fraud alert." Nora nodded, paling as she realized the gravity. "Yes, ma'am. And Miss Elena, this is serious. You should report it." "I intend to," I replied. "But first, I'll protect what's mine." For the next hour, we worked together. I transferred every penny $9,200 in savings and another $1,500 from my checking into a brand new account accessible only to me. I changed every password, and I updated my life insurance beneficiary, removing Lila's name and assigning the Savannah Haven Foundation, a charity for abandoned seniors, instead. Grace, that was my mother's word for my daughter, though her name is Lila, would not see a dime. When the paperwork was finished, Nora leaned across the desk. "Miss Elena, I've seen a lot in my 25 years here. Don't let them scare you. You're stronger than they know. I squeezed her hand, grateful for her quiet solidarity. Thank you, Nora. I'm not the one who should be afraid. By mid-morning, I was walking into the Chatham County Clerk's office. The marble floors echoed under my heels, and my pulse throbbed in my ears. Behind the counter sat Brianna Hughes, Lila's cousin, the one mentioned in the voice memo. Brianna looked up, startled, as if she had seen a ghost walk in wearing pearls. "Aunt Elena," she stammered. "What a surprise!" Papers rustled too quickly as she shoved them into a manila folder. I smiled with sugar in my voice. "Good morning, Brianna. I've come to check on the status of my property. Lila tells me you've been helping her with some paperwork." Her eyes widened, and her cheeks flushed. Oh, nothing serious. Just updating records, you know." "Updating?" I repeated softly, pulling a small recorder from my purse, already running. "Then you won't mind explaining what requires my forged signature." The color drained from her face. "Aunt Elena, please." I placed my phone on the counter and tapped play. The voice memo from Lila filled the room, echoing off the marble. "Brianna says the title transfer is simple. We can move the house before she realizes." Brianna's lips trembled. She sagged into her chair as though the floor had given way. "I didn't want to, but Lila insisted. She said you were slipping. She said it was for your own good." "For my own good?" I hissed. "To steal the home I bled for? To erase me while I'm still breathing?" Her tears spilled fast. "Please don't ruin me. I have 2 children. If I lose this job, you should have thought of them before you sold your soul." I cut in, but then I steadied my breath. "Brianna, I'm giving you a chance. You will help me undo every fraudulent document. You'll give me copies of everything you filed. And you'll sign a statement admitting what you did. In return, I won't drag your name through court with the rest of them." She nodded, broken. And over the next 2 hours, I collected a fat stack of evidence: property transfer attempts, medical evaluations doctored to claim I was confused, forged signatures clumsily traced. My folder bulged with betrayal written in ink. By noon, I was standing in the law offices of Benton and Harlow, facing attorney Samuel Carter, a man whose reputation for bulldog tenacity was well known in Savannah. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silvering hair and a voice that carried weight even in a whisper. I laid every document, every recording, every scrap of proof on his mahogany desk. "Mr. Carter," I said, "my daughter and her husband are trying to declare me incompetent, steal my home, and bury me alive in a facility. I want justice, and I want them to learn that betrayal has consequences." He studied me for a long moment. "Miss Marine," he said at last, "I've seen many seniors manipulated out of their homes, but you've come armed. You're not a victim. You're ready for battle." I met his gaze. "I've been underestimated my whole life. Not anymore." He smiled grimly. "Then let's give them a war." For 3 hours, we drafted a legal strategy: a civil suit for fraud and forgery, a criminal complaint against Lila, Damien, and Brianna, and protective measures to secure my property under court seal until the case was resolved. When I left, my documents had become weapons, my voice a blade honed by betrayal. That evening, I returned home. Lila and Damien sat in my living room, the television flickering shadows across their faces. They looked up as if nothing had changed. "Hi, Mom," Lila said with her too bright smile. "How were your errands?" I settled into my favorite armchair, crimson fabric crisp, pearls gleaming, and looked them straight in the eye. "Productive," I said. "Very productive. Tomorrow some people will be visiting. I expect you'll be here to greet them." Damien frowned. "What people?" "You'll see," I replied softly, almost kindly. "They'll help clarify some things about our family's future." Their faces flickered with confusion. I folded my hands calmly in my lap, but inside, my blood burned with anticipation. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. Tomorrow, masks would fall. Tomorrow, the truth would stand in my living room like a judge. At precisely 10 the next morning, the doorbell rang. I had been waiting in the parlor, my hands folded, my documents neatly stacked on the coffee table like a loaded pistol. The chime echoed through the house, sharp and final, like a gavel. "I'll get it," I said, rising before Lila or Damien could move. When I opened the door, a cold September breeze swept in, along with Attorney Carter, 2 uniformed police officers, and a notary public carrying a black briefcase. Behind them trailed a woman with rimmed glasses and a clipboard, an investigator from Adult Protective Services whom Carter had insisted bring as a witness. "Good morning, Miss Marine," Carter said, his voice carrying the solemn weight of ceremony. "We're here to execute the orders we prepared yesterday." I stepped aside, ushering them into my foyer, my heart hammering in my chest but my smile as composed as a hostess receiving guests for tea. Lila and Damien were on the sofa. When they saw the entourage, their faces drained of color. "Mom," Lila whispered, rising slowly. "What is this?" I gestured for them to sit. "It's time you learned the consequences of your schemes." Carter cleared his throat, placing a thick folder on the table. "Miss Lila Marine and Mr. Damien Foster, we have documented evidence of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to illegally appropriate Miss Marine's property. Today, we are presenting this evidence to law enforcement and securing her assets under legal protection." Damien shot to his feet. "This is insane. You're setting us up." One of the officers moved closer. "Sir, please sit." I kept my voice calm, almost soothing. "If it's a setup, then you won't mind us playing a little message, will you?" I pulled out my phone, tapped play, and the living room filled with my daughter's own damning voice. "Damien, I can't take having my mother here anymore. She's a nuisance. She gets into everything. I've already checked the papers. Carol says we can transfer the house to our name without her realizing. By next Tuesday, she'll be in the home." The words hung heavy in the air, each syllable a nail hammered into their coffin. Lila's hands flew to her mouth. "Turn that off!" she screamed, lunging for the phone. But the officer stepped in, blocking her path. Damien sneered, his voice trembling with fury. "This doesn't prove anything. It's private illegal to use." "On the contrary," Carter said smoothly, producing another sheet. "It's admissible as evidence, and we have much more." He laid out the forged bank authorization, then my genuine signature beside it. The difference was stark, undeniable. That's not mine," Lila stammered, her voice breaking. "Stop lying," I said, my tone steady, steel hidden in velvet. "Brianna already confessed." Carter lifted a notarized affidavit. "Here is your cousin Brianna's signed statement. She details how you pressured her into falsifying property documents and forging medical evaluations. We also have an audio recording of her confessing." The investigator with the clipboard scribbled notes furiously, her eyes darting between the evidence and Lila's pale, crumbling face. Damien pressed his palms into his knees, muttering, "Carol, she's just trying to save herself. She's lying." Carter adjusted his glasses. "Really? Then how do you explain these?" He produced the fraudulent medical reports, stamped with a clinic seal, diagnosing me with dementia. Then he placed beside them a fresh evaluation from Dr. Alan Shepard, the city hospital's geriatric specialist. "Miss Marine's cognitive health is excellent, above average for her age. These other reports are fabrications." The silence that followed was suffocating. I leaned forward, fixing my daughter with a gaze that had once taught her discipline and now demanded truth. "Do you deny you told Damien it wouldn't be so bad if I died in the home because my life insurance was in your name?" Her eyes brimmed with tears. I never..." The phone played again. "Besides, the insurance is in our name, so if something happens to her at the home, it wouldn't be so bad." The officers exchanged a look. One muttered under his breath, "God help us." Lila collapsed into sobs, her mascara staining her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean it." We were desperate. We had debts. I wasn't thinking. Desperation doesn't justify betrayal, I said, my voice cracking for the first time. You had my love, my support, my sacrifices for 35 years, and you repaid me by planning my burial while I was still alive. Damien snarled, his mask shattering. You ruined our lives, you old witch. We had it all planned, and you just couldn't play along. That's enough, one officer barked, stepping forward with handcuffs. The investigator raised her hand. Miss Marine, do you wish to press charges? I swallowed, feeling the jagged ache of a mother's heart torn between blood and survival. My gaze lingered on my daughter, her once bright face twisted with greed, now streaked with tears. Yes, I said finally, my voice low but resolute. Proceed. The click of steel around their wrists echoed like the closing of a chapter. My own daughter's cries followed her down the hall, mingling with Damien's curses. As the door shut behind them, silence descended. For the first time in months, my house felt like mine again, quiet, sacred, free. Yet my knees trembled, and I sank into my armchair, the enormity of it washing over me. I had defended my dignity, but at what cost to my heart? The next morning, I awoke to an eerie calm. My house once filled with whispers, fake smiles, and the constant scraping of betrayal was finally silent. The silence was almost too much. It pressed against me, reminding me that I had traded my daughter's presence for my own dignity. I brewed a pot of coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen. For a moment, I felt like myself again, Elena, not the victim they had painted me to be. But as I sat at the table, a stack of freshly delivered letters caught my eye. I slit the first envelope open with a trembling hand. You're a cruel mother, the anonymous note read. You destroyed your daughter's life. What kind of woman hands her only child over to the police? No wonder she hates you. I dropped the letter, bile rising in my throat. Another envelope revealed an even darker message. Rot alone, old woman. You raised a snake, and she finally bit you. Everyone knows you deserved it. My fingers shook as I opened one after another, each one dripping with venom. Some were scrawled in childish handwriting, others typed neatly like official memos. They accused me of madness, selfishness, even hinted that I had fabricated everything out of spite. I knew immediately this wasn't random. It had Damien's fingerprints all over it. By afternoon, the phone calls started. At first, I thought they were ordinary telemarketers, but when I answered, the voices were sharp, mocking. You'll pay for what you did to your daughter, a woman's voice hissed before slamming the line dead. At midnight, another call jolted me awake. A man's voice, low and sinister, growled, You're a bitter old hag. You'll die alone, and no one will mourn you. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching the phone to my chest, my body trembling. I wanted to scream, to call someone, anyone but who? My daughter was the one who had orchestrated my torment. By the end of the week, the harassment escalated. A fake social worker showed up at my door, clipboard in hand, insisting she had received reports that I was confused and unsafe. I demanded her credentials. She stammered, fumbled, then fled down the street. The very next day, a man in a cheap suit arrived, claiming to be from a home security company. At your age, ma'am, you're very vulnerable. Better sign up now. His smirk told me this was no sales pitch. Even strangers began to look at me differently. At the grocery store, 2 women whispered as I walked by, their voices dripping with pity. That's her, one said. The crazy old woman who accused her own daughter. I wanted to shout, I'm not crazy. I'm not cruel. I was betrayed. But the words lodged in my throat. The cruelest blow came when my dear friend, Sylvia, stopped by with tears in her eyes. Elena, honey, Grace told me you've been confused lately, wandering at night, forgetting things. I didn't believe it, but her voice broke. People are talking. I sank into my armchair, the weight of it crushing me. My own daughter had poisoned not only my home but my very reputation. She was stripping me of the only thing I had left, my dignity in the eyes of others. That night, I couldn't bear the silence. I opened the cedar chest in my bedroom, where I kept the treasures of my past photographs, my mother's rosary, a yellowed letter folded at the bottom. It was my mother's handwriting, shaky but resolute, written decades ago when Grace was still a little girl. Elena, it read, "If you are ever betrayed, even by blood, do not let it break you. You are stronger than you think. Do not confuse sacrifice with love, nor allow manipulation to disguise itself as care. True love does not steal, lie, or destroy. True love protects." Tears blurred the words. I pressed the letter to my heart, hearing my mother's voice as clearly as if she were in the room with me. At dawn, I called Attorney Carter. "I won't back down," I told him, my voice steadier than I felt. "No matter what they say, no matter how they try to break me, I want every charge to stand. They will not take my dignity." There was a pause, then his voice, warm with admiration. "That's the Elena Marine I know." The weeks that followed tested every ounce of my resolve. Court proceedings are never kind, but when family is involved, they carve deeper wounds than any stranger's knife. The first hearing was set on a gray Monday morning in downtown Savannah. I walked into the courthouse wearing a navy dress and my mother's pearl earrings. I had chosen them deliberately. They were a shield, a reminder of her strength. Grace was already seated at the defendant's table, her head bent low, but when she looked up, her eyes were icy. Beside her sat Damien, stiff in his cheap suit, jaw clenched. Carol, pale and fidgeting, looked as if she wanted to disappear through the floor. I took my seat next to Attorney Carter, my heart pounding so loudly I thought the entire courtroom could hear it. The judge entered, and the bailiff called for order. From the very first statement, Grace's lawyer tried to paint me as a confused old woman, manipulated by outsiders. "Miss Marine is a 70-year-old woman in fragile mental condition," he declared. "Her daughter has only ever acted out of concern for her well-being." The words stung like acid. But then Carter stood, calm and precise. "Your Honor, we will prove with irrefutable evidence that Miss Grace Marine conspired with her husband and cousin to forge documents, embezzle funds, and arrange for Marianne's involuntary commitment, all to seize her property. Concern for well-being had nothing to do with it. It was greed, pure and simple." One by one, the evidence was laid bare. The forged bank authorization letter, the falsified medical reports, the payment receipt for the nursing home deposit, and then came the recordings. When my daughter's voice filled the courtroom, "With the house, we can pay off all our debts and finally live without her controlling us," a gasp rippled through the audience. Grace's face turned white. Damien clenched his fists, and Carol sobbed quietly. I sat motionless, hands folded tightly in my lap, refusing to let my tears show. Inside, my heart was breaking all over again. That was my daughter's voice, my Grace, the child I had rocked to sleep, whose first steps I had cheered, whose graduation gown I had ironed with trembling hands. Now she was denying me, accusing me of fabricating everything. During recess, I caught sight of her across the hallway. For a moment, her mask slipped. Her eyes filled with something raw fear, perhaps shame. But as soon as she saw me looking, her mouth hardened and she turned away. The trial dragged on for days. Witnesses came forward. Neighbors testified to overhearing strange conversations. Carol, under oath, confessed everything with tears streaming down her face. Grace told me her mother wouldn't notice. She choked. She promised me it was just paperwork, that it wasn't really stealing. I was wrong. Grace glared at her with such fury that I thought she might leap across the stand. Damien whispered harshly in her ear, but even his confidence seemed to be unraveling. When it was my turn to testify, my knees trembled as I walked to the witness box. I took the oath, then gripped the railing with both hands. "I gave my daughter everything," I began, my voice quivering. "Every cent I earned cleaning houses, every ounce of my strength. I sold my mother's jewelry, my own wedding ring, to pay for her education. I never once said no when she needed help. But love, true love, does not repay sacrifice with betrayal. I am not confused. I am not demented. I am a mother who deserves respect, not theft. Silence followed my words. Even the judge looked moved. When I returned to my seat, Carter placed his hand over mine briefly. "You did perfectly," he whispered. By the final day, the weight of evidence was undeniable. Grace's lawyer attempted one last plea, painting her as desperate, misguided, a daughter overwhelmed by financial pressure. But no amount of eloquence could erase the recordings, the forged signatures, or the plans to lock me away. As the judge prepared to read his decision, I held my breath. The room felt suspended in time. After reviewing the evidence, this court finds Grace Marine and Damian Rojas guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, falsification of documents, and attempted illegal appropriation of property. Carol Perez is found guilty of falsification of records, but will receive a reduced sentence due to her cooperation. My daughter gasped, covering her face with her hands. Damian muttered a curse. Carol wept openly. I sat still, my heart pounding, a single tear sliding down my cheek, not of grief, but of release. Justice had spoken. The gavel's echo still rang in my ears when the courtroom emptied, but my body felt hollow, as if all the air had been stolen from me. Justice had been served, yes, but there was no triumph in watching my only daughter led away in handcuffs. Grace's cries haunted me that night. "Mom, please, I'm your daughter." Her voice cracked with desperation, but beneath it, I could still hear the cold laughter from that recording, the casual cruelty with which she had spoken of my death. That duality shredded me. The next few days passed in a haze. I kept expecting her to call, to burst through the door, to apologize. But the only sounds in my house were the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of old floorboards. For the first time in decades, I was completely, utterly alone. Then the retaliation began. It started small. Anonymous comments online calling me a liar, accusing me of senility. I tried to ignore them, but then a photo appeared on a community Facebook page taken from across the street while I tended my roses. The caption read, "Poor confused woman. Pray for her before she hurts herself." My stomach twisted. They were trying to paint me as unstable. Soon, I noticed strange cars idling near my house at night. Once, a brick was hurled against my front porch, shattering a pot of geraniums. No note, no message, just silent intimidation. When I called the police, the officer sighed. "Miss Marine, without proof of who's doing this, there's not much we can do. Could be random teenagers." But I knew better. This had Damian's foul hands all over it. One morning I opened my mailbox to find a stack of letters. The first one made my knees buckle. "You'll die alone. Everyone knows your daughter hates you. Why don't you save her the trouble?" Another, "No one believes you. They all know you're crazy. Watch your back." I sat on the kitchen floor, clutching the letters, rocking like a child. The weight of it all, years of sacrifice, months of betrayal, days of loneliness crushed me until sobs shook my body. And then, through swollen eyes, I remembered my mother's letter, the one I had read the night the harassment began. Don't confuse sacrifice with love. Don't allow manipulation to disguise itself as care. Her words rose inside me like a flame. I refused to let Grace's poison destroy what was left of my spirit. The very next morning, I met with Attorney Carter. "They're trying to destroy me," I told him, spreading the letters across his desk. My voice shook, but beneath it lay steel. "I want to fight back." He leaned back, studying me. "Elena, you've already won in court. Do you really want to escalate this?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Because this isn't just about me anymore. They will do this to someone else if I let them. I won't be silent." Carter's eyes softened, and he nodded. "Then we'll proceed." Within days, he filed harassment complaints, traced the fake social media accounts to Damien's workplace computer, and gathered security footage from neighbors' cameras showing Grace's friends leaving letters in my mailbox. Piece by piece, their scheme began to unravel again. But while the law worked slowly, I needed something immediate, something to remind myself I wasn't powerless. That afternoon, I walked to the Golden Horizon Foundation, a community center for seniors that I had once donated to but never visited. The moment I stepped inside, I was enveloped in warmth, laughter, conversation, the smell of fresh coffee. A woman in her 70s, elegant and strong-eyed, introduced herself. "I'm Rosa, first time here?" I nodded, my throat tight. She squeezed my hand. "Then welcome, Carita. Here, no one is alone." That evening, for the first time in months, I slept without fear. Not because the danger had vanished, but because I had remembered that I wasn't fighting only for myself. I was fighting for every mother, every elder, every soul who had ever been betrayed by those they loved most. The harassment didn't stop overnight, but my resolve had changed. Instead of hiding behind drawn curtains, I began documenting everything, every letter, every strange car, every anonymous call. I kept a meticulous notebook, just as I once had for Grace's school expenses, only this time it was evidence of cruelty instead of sacrifice. Attorney Carter submitted the files to the judge overseeing the fraud case. Within 2 weeks, a restraining order was issued against Grace and Damien. They were forbidden from contacting me directly or indirectly. When the sheriff delivered the order to their apartment, Damien's rage boiled over. He showed up outside the courthouse the next morning, screaming insults at me, only to be hauled away in handcuffs for violating the very order he had just received. But their attempts to break me had already failed. My strength had returned, and I found an unlikely source of peace in the Golden Horizon Foundation. I started volunteering twice a week. At first, I just served coffee and handed out blankets. But then I began listening. There was Lupe, an 80-year-old whose son had sold her car behind her back. There was Mr. Harris, who had been evicted from his own home after signing documents he couldn't read. And there was Carmen, a tiny woman with trembling hands, who whispered to me one afternoon, "My daughter says I'm useless." Sometimes I believe her. I took her hands in mine and said firmly, "You are not useless. You are a survivor, and you are not alone." In their stories, I heard echoes of my own. The betrayal, the humiliation, the shame. But I also saw resilience. Together, we weren't victims. We were a chorus of voices refusing to be silenced. One evening, Rosa, the woman who had welcomed me, invited me to speak at a small gathering. "Tell them your story," she urged. "They need to hear how you fought back." My throat tightened, but I agreed. When I stood before that group of tired but hopeful faces, I felt my mother's presence guiding me. I told them about Grace's betrayal, the forged papers, the recordings, the trial. I told them about the letters meant to break me, and how instead they had lit a fire in me. When I finished, silence filled the room. Then Carmen rose slowly and said, "If she can stand up to her own daughter, then maybe I can stand up to mine." The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was steady, like the beating of many hearts in unison. That night, I realized something profound. My pain had been real, devastating, almost fatal, but it was no longer just mine. By sharing it, I had transformed it into a torch that could light the way for others. And in that light, I saw the path forward. Grace and Damien had tried to strip me of my dignity, but instead, they had given me a new purpose. I wasn't just Elena Marine, the betrayed mother. I was Elena, the voice for those too frightened to speak. Months passed, and life in Savannah began to feel different. Not lighter, exactly, but steadier, as though the storms had blown through and left behind a raw, clean air. Yet the scars remained. Every time the phone rang late at night, I flinched. Every time I saw a woman with dark hair like Grace's, a pang pierced me. But instead of letting the pain consume me, I channeled it. The Golden Horizon Foundation asked me to speak more often, and eventually, I was invited to a local radio program. Sitting in that studio, with the microphone glowing red and the host asking about elder fraud, I told my story publicly for the first time. "I am not ashamed," I said firmly, my voice steady. "Shame belongs to those who exploit their parents, not to those who defend themselves. If your family is plotting against you, don't confuse blood with loyalty. Protect yourself." The phone lines flooded with callers, seniors, widows, even middle-aged children racked with guilt for not protecting their own parents. By the time the show ended, I realized I had become something I never expected, an advocate. But behind the advocacy, I still carried the ache of motherhood. One Sunday afternoon, while I was pruning the roses on my new balcony, my neighbor Nora came by with a basket of muffins. "You look thoughtful," she said, setting the basket on the railing. I sighed. "It's Grace's birthday today. I keep wondering if she's blowing out candles somewhere, and if she ever thinks of me." Nora touched my shoulder gently. "Of course she thinks of you. Regret is a shadow that never leaves. But Elena, thinking of her doesn't mean you have to invite the darkness back." I nodded, tears brimming but not falling. Weeks later, a letter arrived, Grace's handwriting on the envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Dear Mom," it began, "not a day passes that I don't regret. Therapy has shown me the monster I became. I won't ask you to forgive me, I don't deserve it. But I need you to know I finally see you as you always were, a mother who gave me everything." I read it 3 times, each word digging into me like a thorn and a balm all at once. She didn't ask to return. She didn't plead for money. She simply admitted the truth. I sat for hours with the letter in my lap. Part of me wanted to crumple it, to shout that her regrets meant nothing after what she had done. But another part, the part that still remembered her golden dress at 15, her graduation cap, the child who once kissed me on the cheek and whispered, "You're the best mom in the world," that part wept. That night, I wrote back, "Grace, I forgive you, because my heart cannot live with hatred. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting, nor does it mean trust. I wish you healing, but my peace is no longer tied to your choices. Mother." As I sealed the envelope, a strange calm filled me. For the first time, I felt that I had finally closed the circle, not with reconciliation, but with release. The seasons shifted, and so did I. By spring, my apartment no longer felt like a place I had fled to. It felt like home. The walls bore my paintings now, vivid scenes of rivers and magnolias, each stroke of color a reminder that beauty could bloom from brokenness. At the Golden Horizon Foundation, I wasn't just a volunteer anymore. Rosa often introduced me as Elena, who turned her pain into purpose. I had become the one people sought out when they were trembling with doubt, their voices breaking with the same shame I once carried. One afternoon, Carmen, the frail woman who had once whispered she was useless, approached me with a radiant smile. "Elena," she said, "I told my daughter I won't sign over the house." She screamed, but I didn't bend. "I remembered your story." She hugged me, and I felt something shift inside me. Every betrayal I had endured, every sleepless night, every cruel word Grace had spoken, all of it had become a seed of courage for someone else. But life still had its quiet aches. Sometimes at night, I would dream of Grace as a little girl, her hair in pigtails, clutching my hand as we walked to kindergarten. I would wake with tears, soaking my pillow. Even though I had forgiven her, the ghost of what we once were lingered. Nora, always perceptive, noticed my lingering sadness. One evening, while we were having tea on her porch, she said softly, "Elena, maybe you should think about building something new, not just surviving." "What do you mean?" I asked. "A new legacy," she replied. "Not the one Grace tried to steal, but one you choose. Something that carries your name and your values forward." Her words stayed with me. The next morning, I called Attorney Carter. "I want to set up a trust," I told him, "for the foundation. When I'm gone, every cent, every brick of what I've built should go to helping seniors like me." He smiled through the phone. "That, Miss Marine, will be the purest revenge. Your daughter can never touch what she once tried to steal. Instead, your legacy will protect those she would never have lifted a finger for." When the paperwork was done, I walked out of the office lighter. My life, my sacrifices, my house, all of it was no longer a prize for greedy hands. It was a shield for the vulnerable. And for the first time in decades, I felt like my mother's words had finally come true. Family is what you give your blood for, but only when it's built on love, not exploitation. By summer, the transformation was undeniable. Where once my days were heavy with dread, now they pulsed with purpose. The mornings began with walks along the Savannah River, the water glinting gold under the rising sun, and the evenings ended with community dinners where laughter echoed louder than loneliness. One afternoon, Rosa handed me a flyer. "They want you to speak at the City Hall Forum on Elder Rights," she said, her eyes gleaming. "Your story has become more than survival, Elena. It's a lesson." Standing at that podium weeks later, I felt the weight of every eye on me, strangers, officials, even reporters. I cleared my throat, my hands steady, my voice strong. "I was once told that true love means sacrifice without limits," I began. "But I've learned that true love also means respect. When my daughter betrayed me, she didn't just try to take my house, she tried to erase my dignity. What saved me wasn't money, or even the law. It was the decision to defend myself, to say enough." The applause rose like a tide, and in that sound I heard the voices of all those who had once felt too small to fight back. Later that night, as I sat on my balcony with Nora and a glass of red wine, she said, "You realize you've become a beacon, don't you?" I laughed softly. A beacon with wrinkles and aching knees, perhaps. But I knew she was right. My name was being whispered in circles far beyond Savannah advocacy groups, church communities, even online forums where families shared stories of betrayal and resilience. My survival had turned into a movement, and my heart swelled with both pride and humility. And yet, the quiet ache of motherhood still lingered. Sometimes I caught myself setting an extra plate at the table out of habit, as though Grace might walk through the door again. Other times, when I passed a boutique window and saw a dress she would have loved, I felt the sting of absence. But instead of letting that ache hollow me, I allowed it to remind me of my strength. One evening, I found myself writing in my journal, "Blood ties may fray, but chosen family, the ones who respect, uplift, and protect, are stronger than chains of inheritance." I closed the book and exhaled. My story was no longer one of betrayal alone. It had become a testament to resilience, dignity, and the unexpected beauty of beginning again. A year after the betrayal unraveled, I stood at a crossroads, not of despair, but of renewal. That spring morning, sunlight spilled across my apartment, lighting up the canvases I had painted. Gardens in bloom, stormy seas, quiet cottages by the river. Each one was a mirror of my journey: chaos, endurance, and finally, serenity. At 70, I was no longer defined by sacrifice alone. I was a woman who had fought, won, and reclaimed her voice. My days were filled with volunteer work, dance classes, and evenings spent sharing meals with friends who had become my true family. News of Grace and Richard trickled in through neighbors, debts mounting, friends abandoning them, whispers of divorce. Instead of bitterness, I felt only a quiet sadness. They had forged their path, and now they bore its weight. Their downfall no longer defined me. One evening, after a community gathering, Rosa hugged me tight. "You've given us more than advice, Elena. You've given us hope." Hope. That word struck me. Because what I once thought was the end, the moment I heard that cruel voice message had instead been the beginning of a life I never imagined. As I sat later on my balcony, watching the stars prick the velvet sky, I whispered a promise to myself. I will never again confuse blood with love, nor sacrifice with submission. I will live the years I have left with dignity, joy, and courage. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 more life stories that I highly recommend. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.